The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as Princess Elena stood at the tall windows of her private chamber, watching the royal gardens come alive with the first light of dawn. Her fingers traced the cold glass while her mind wandered to memories that now felt like distant dreams. 25 years had passed since she first walked through these grand halls as a young woman of 22, full of hope and innocent love for the man who would become her husband, Prince Alexander. Elena remembered that first meeting at the Autumn Ball of 1999. She had been a commoner then, working as an art history graduate student at the University of Cambridge. Her friend Sarah had convinced her to attend the charity gala where young royals mingled with academics and philanthropists. Elena wore a simple navy blue dress that her mother had helped her choose, nothing compared to the elegant gowns of the other ladies present. She felt out of place among the glittering crowd until she bumped into a tall, handsome stranger while admiring a Renaissance painting in the gallery wing. "Careful there," the man had said with a warm smile, steadying her as she nearly dropped her champagne glass. "Though I must say, your passion for the artwork is quite charming." Elena had looked up into the kindest brown eyes she had ever seen. The stranger had sandy brown hair that fell slightly across his forehead, and, when he smiled, small lines appeared at the corners of his eyes. He wore a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, but there was something approachable about him that made her feel instantly comfortable. "I'm sorry," Elena had stammered. "I was just admiring the brushwork in this Caravaggio. The way he captures light is absolutely breathtaking." The man's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "You know art well? I'm Alexander, by the way." "Elena," she had replied, not yet knowing she was speaking to the future heir to the throne. They spent the entire evening walking through the gallery, discussing paintings and sharing stories about their lives. Alexander told her about his love for environmental conservation and his work with various charities. Elena shared her dreams of becoming a museum curator and her research on Renaissance art. When the evening ended, Alexander asked if he could see her again. Their courtship had been a beautiful dream. For 3 years, they met in quiet cafes, took long walks through Hyde Park, and shared intimate dinners in small restaurants where Alexander could blend in with the crowd. Elena fell deeply in love with his compassionate heart, his quick wit, and his genuine desire to use his privilege to help others. He loved her authenticity, her intelligence, and the way she saw beauty in everything around her. When Alexander finally proposed on a snowy December evening in 2002, Elena felt like the luckiest woman in the world. He had taken her to the same gallery where they first met, and as they stood before the same Caravaggio painting, he dropped to one knee with his grandmother's sapphire ring. "Elena, you've made me believe in love stories," he had whispered as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Will you write the rest of our story with me?" Their wedding in Westminster Cathedral in June 2003 was called the wedding of the century. Elena walked down the aisle in a stunning ivory silk gown designed by the royal couturier, with her mother's pearl necklace as her something old and Alexander's grandmother's diamond tiara as her something borrowed. As she approached the altar and saw Alexander waiting for her, his eyes filled with tears of joy, she felt that their love could conquer anything. The early years of their marriage were golden. Elena threw herself into royal duties with grace and enthusiasm. She became patron of several children's charities and art museums. The public adored her warmth and relatability. She and Alexander traveled the world together, supporting causes they both cared about. In 2005, their first child, Prince Michael, was born, followed by Princess Sophie in 2007 and Prince James in 2010. Elena loved being a mother. She insisted on hands-on parenting despite royal protocol, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, and attending every school play and soccer match. The family would spend quiet evenings together in their private apartments, playing board games and sharing stories from their days. Alexander was a devoted father who coached Michael's cricket team and taught Sophie to ride horses in the palace stables. But, as the years passed, the pressures of royal life began to take their toll. Elena watched Alexander transform under the weight of his future responsibilities as king. The carefree, passionate man she had fallen in love with became increasingly burdened by duty and protocol. Their private conversations grew shorter and more focused on schedules and obligations rather than dreams and feelings. The media scrutiny intensified as well. Every outfit Elena wore was analyzed, every public appearance dissected. Photographers followed their children to school and hid in bushes near their country home. The constant attention made Elena feel like she was living in a fishbowl, unable to have genuine moments with her family without worrying about who might be watching. By 2015, Elena began to notice the distance growing between her and Alexander. He spent long hours in meetings with government officials and royal advisors. Their conversations became perfunctory, focused on logistics rather than connection. When they attended public events together, they played their parts perfectly, but, in private, they felt like strangers sharing a house. Elena tried to bridge the gap by planning romantic dinners and weekend getaways, but Alexander always seemed distracted. His mind was constantly on affairs of state, environmental crises, and the countless demands of his position. She understood his dedication to service, but she mourned the loss of the man who used to discuss art with her for hours and surprise her with handwritten poems. The turning point came in 2018 when Elena was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that caused chronic fatigue and joint pain. She needed to reduce her public appearances, but instead of bringing them closer together, Alexander seemed to retreat further into his work. Elena felt abandoned during the most vulnerable period of her life. Now, as she stood at the window watching the sunrise over the gardens where her children had played and where she and Alexander had once walked hand in hand, Elena felt the weight of their unspoken decision. Last night, after months of painful conversations, they had finally admitted what they had both known for years. Their marriage, despite all their efforts, was beyond repair. The irony was that they still loved each other deeply. Alexander had told her through tears that she would always be the greatest love of his life. Elena knew that he was a good man who had simply been crushed by the impossible demands of his destiny. But love alone had not been enough to save them from the forces that pulled them apart. As Elena prepared to face another day in the palace that had been her home for over 2 decades, she thought about their 3 children, now teenagers who would soon learn that their parents' fairy tale marriage was coming to an end. Her heart broke not just for herself and Alexander, but for Michael, Sophie, and James, who would have to navigate their parents' divorce in the harsh glare of international media attention. The morning light grew stronger, illuminating the rose garden where Alexander had proposed all those years ago. Elena touched her wedding ring, still sparkling after 25 years, and whispered a prayer for strength. Today would begin the most difficult chapter of their love story, learning how to say goodbye while trying to protect their children and preserve their dignity in the face of inevitable public scrutiny. Prince Alexander sat in his private study, surrounded by mahogany bookshelves filled with volumes on history, politics, and environmental science. The room had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the constant demands of royal life and find a moment of peace. But this morning, even his beloved study felt suffocating. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the statement his private secretary had prepared for the media announcement that would change everything. Their Royal Highnesses Prince Alexander and Princess Elena have made the difficult decision to separate after 25 years of marriage, the statement read. This decision has not been taken lightly and follows months of careful consideration. Both Prince Alexander and Princess Elena remain committed to their children and will continue their royal duties separately. They ask for privacy during this challenging time for their family. Alexander set the paper down and rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar tension headache that had plagued him for years. He thought back to the conversation with Elena the night before, when they had finally spoken the words that had been hanging between them for months. "We can't keep pretending, Alexander," Elena had said softly, sitting across from him in their private sitting room. "We're like actors playing roles in our own lives." He had wanted to argue, to fight for their marriage the way he fought for environmental legislation and charitable causes. But deep in his heart, he knew she was right. They had been drifting apart for years, 2 people who had once shared everything now struggling to find common ground, even in simple conversations. The demands of his position had slowly consumed him. As the heir apparent, every moment of his life was scheduled, every decision weighed against its impact on the monarchy and the nation. He had meetings with prime ministers, attended state dinners, traveled to disaster zones, and campaigned for climate action. His days began at 6 in the morning and often ended past midnight. Elena had tried to understand. She had supported his work, attended countless functions by his side, and managed their household while raising their 3 children. But Alexander could see the loneliness in her eyes during those rare, quiet moments when they were alone together. She had sacrificed her own dreams to support his destiny, giving up her art history career and personal independence to become the perfect royal wife. The guilt of watching Elena fade into the background of their own marriage had eaten away at Alexander for years. She deserved better than a husband who was always rushing to the next meeting, always thinking about the next crisis, always putting duty before love. But he had not known how to change course. The weight of centuries of royal tradition and the expectations of an entire nation had made him feel trapped in a life that no longer felt like his own. Their physical relationship had suffered as well. They had not shared a bed in over 2 years, not out of anger or resentment, but from sheer exhaustion and emotional distance. Alexander would collapse into his bed after 18-hour days, while Elena retreated to her own room to read or work on her charitable projects. They had become roommates rather than lovers, co-parents rather than partners. The children had started to notice. 16-year-old Michael had asked Alexander last month why he and Elena never seemed to laugh together anymore. 14-year-old Sophie had mentioned to her mother that her friend's parents seemed more huggy than her parents. 12-year-old James had simply accepted the distance as normal, which perhaps hurt most of all. Alexander knew that staying together for the children's sake would only teach them that marriage was about duty rather than love. He and Elena had agreed that they wanted their children to believe in authentic love and honest communication, not the polite facade their marriage had become. The process of reaching this decision had been agonizing. They had tried marriage counseling, attended sessions with a discreet therapist who specialized in high-profile couples. Dr. Richards had helped them communicate more openly than they had in years, but ultimately confirmed what they both suspected. They had grown into fundamentally different people with incompatible needs. "You married Elena, the arts student," Dr. Richards had observed during their final session. "And Elena married Alexander, the charming environmentalist. But you're now Alexander, the future king, and she's Princess Elena, patron of charities. Those are different people with different roles and different pressures." Alexander had tried to be both the king-in-waiting and the loving husband Elena deserved, but the balance had proved impossible to maintain. The constitutional monarchy demanded his complete dedication, leaving little emotional energy for personal relationships. Even their vacations were working holidays, filled with official engagements and diplomatic obligations. Elena's health struggles had added another layer of complexity. Her autoimmune condition had forced her to cancel numerous public appearances, leading to critical media coverage that suggested she was shirking her royal duties. Alexander had wanted to defend her publicly, but was advised by palace officials that drawing attention to her illness would only increase speculation about her fitness for royal life. The irony was crushing. The very institution that had brought them together was now forcing them apart. Alexander loved being of service to his country, but he mourned the loss of his personal happiness and his marriage to the woman he still considered his soulmate. Now, as he prepared to tell their children about the separation, Alexander felt the full weight of his failure as a husband and father. Michael would be particularly devastated, as he had always idealized his parents' relationship and dreamed of finding a love story like theirs. Sophie, already struggling with teenage emotions, would blame herself somehow, and James, still so young, would lose his sense of security. Alexander's private secretary knocked gently on the study door. "Your Royal Highness, Princess Elena is ready to meet with the children in the blue sitting room." Taking a deep breath, Alexander straightened his tie and walked toward what would be the most difficult conversation of his life. He found Elena waiting in their family's private sitting room, looking elegant but fragile in a simple cream-colored dress. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but she managed a brave smile when she saw him. Their 3 children sat on the familiar blue sofa, where they had shared countless family moments over the years. Michael, tall and serious like his father, sensed immediately that something was wrong. Sophie fidgeted with her school uniform skirt, while James swung his legs from the sofa, still young enough to be primarily concerned with missing his favorite television program. "Children," Alexander began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "Your mother and I need to talk with you about some important changes in our family." As he and Elena began to explain their decision, Alexander watched their children's faces transform from confusion to shock to heartbreak. In that moment, he felt the full cost of the choice they had made. Their fairy tale marriage was ending, but they were determined to help their children write their own stories of resilience, love, and hope for the future. The news of Prince Alexander and Princess Elena's separation broke on a gray Tuesday morning in March 2024, sending shockwaves through the kingdom of Ethoria and around the world. Within hours, the palace gates were surrounded by reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers hoping to catch a glimpse of the royal couple who had captured hearts for over 2 decades. Lady Catherine Morrison, Elena's best friend since their university days at Cambridge, received the call at 7 in the morning. Through tears, Elena had whispered into the phone, "Cat, it's happening today. We're announcing the separation." Catherine immediately canceled her meetings and drove straight to the palace, using her security clearance as Elena's lady-in-waiting to enter through the private entrance. She found her dearest friend sitting in the morning room, staring blankly at untouched tea and toast while news anchors discussed her marriage on the television screen. "Turn that off," Catherine said firmly, grabbing the remote control. She sat beside Elena and pulled her into a protective embrace. "How are you holding up?" "I feel like I'm watching someone else's life fall apart," Elena replied numbly. 25 years, Cat. We announced our engagement in this very room, and now. Catherine had been Elena's confidant through every stage of her royal journey. She had helped Elena choose her wedding dress, supported her through difficult pregnancies, and watched as her friend gradually lost herself in the demands of royal life. Unlike the palace staff and other courtiers, Catherine could speak to Elena with complete honesty. "You're doing the brave thing," Catherine assured her. "I've watched you both struggling for years. Sometimes love means knowing when to let go." Meanwhile, in the West Wing of the palace, Alexander met with his private secretary, James Wellington, and the Queen's press secretary to manage the media response. The phones had been ringing nonstop since the announcement, with interview requests for major networks around the world and statements needed for various royal correspondents. "The public reaction is intense, sir," James reported, scrolling through social media on his tablet. The hashtag Alexander Elena is trending worldwide. Many people are expressing shock and sadness, but there's also an outpouring of support for both you and Princess Elena. Alexander nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about his children, who had left for school that morning trying to pretend everything was normal while knowing that their classmates would soon be discussing their parents' separation in every hallway and dormitory. Prince Michael, attending Eton College, had texted his father an hour earlier. "Dad, everyone here is being weird around me. Can I come home?" Alexander had replied, encouraging him to stay strong and maintain his normal routine, but his heart ached thinking about his eldest son facing this alone. Princess Sophie, at her boarding school in Scotland, had called crying after seeing the news on a friend's phone. "Mummy, are you and Daddy getting divorced because of me? Because I've been difficult lately?" Elena had spent 20 minutes reassuring her daughter that the separation had nothing to do with the children and everything to do with the adult challenges she and Alexander faced. Prince James, still at the local preparatory school, would be picked up early by his security detail to avoid media attention outside the school gates. At 12 years old, he was struggling to understand why his parents, who still seemed to care about each other, could no longer live together. The international media reaction was swift and intense. Royal correspondents who had covered Elena and Alexander's relationship since their early courtship provided detailed analysis of the signs that observers might have missed. Fashion magazines examined Elena's recent public appearances for clues about her emotional state. Political commentators discussed the implications for Alexander's future coronation. The People's Princess and Her Prince, a love story's heartbreaking end, read the headline in the Daily Telegraph. The article featured a photo retrospective of Elena and Alexander's most romantic public moments, their first official appearance together, their wedding day, the births of their children, and their last joint engagement just 3 weeks prior. European royal families released statements of support. The King of Spain wrote personally to Alexander, sharing his own experience with public scrutiny of his family. The Crown Princess of Sweden called Elena to offer friendship and understanding from someone who had navigated similar challenges. But perhaps the most touching response came from ordinary citizens who had followed Elena and Alexander's love story for years. Flowers began appearing outside the palace gates, not in celebration, but in sympathy. Handwritten notes from children, elderly couples, and young lovers expressed gratitude for the years of joy the royal couple had brought to the nation. One letter, from an elderly woman named Margaret from Yorkshire, particularly moved Elena when Catherine read it aloud. "Your Royal Highness, my husband and I have been married for 58 years, and we want you to know that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to set each other free. You and Prince Alexander have given us so many beautiful moments of hope and romance. We pray that you both find peace and happiness in whatever comes next. The palace staff, many of whom had worked for the royal family for decades, struggled with their own emotions. Elena's personal assistant, Maria Santos, had been with her for 15 years and felt like she was losing not just an employer but a dear friend. Alexander's valet, Thomas Fletcher, had dressed him for his wedding and every important event since. The housekeeping staff who maintained the family's private apartments knew intimately the small signs of a marriage in distress. The separate bedrooms, the missed family dinners, the polite but distant interactions. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the royal physician who had cared for the family's health for 12 years, was particularly concerned about Elena's well-being. The stress of the separation, combined with her autoimmune condition, could seriously impact her physical health. She discreetly arranged for additional support and monitoring to ensure Elena's medical needs were met during this emotional crisis. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had officiated Alexander and Elena's wedding, released a statement emphasizing forgiveness, healing, and the ongoing love both parents shared for their children. Religious leaders from various faiths within the kingdom offered prayers and support for the family during their difficult time. As the day progressed, both Elena and Alexander maintained their scheduled commitments. Elena attended a board meeting for the Children's Art Foundation, her voice steady as she discussed funding for arts education programs. Alexander kept his appointment with environmental scientists discussing climate change policy, though those who knew him well noticed the strain around his eyes. That evening, after the children returned home from school, the family gathered for dinner in their private dining room, as they had done thousands of times before. But tonight, everything felt different. The conversation was careful and polite, with no one quite knowing how to act naturally in this new reality. "Will we still have family holidays together?" James asked quietly, picking at his shepherd's pie. Elena and Alexander exchanged a look across the table. They had discussed this possibility during their separation planning, but hadn't yet shared details with the children. "We're going to figure out new traditions that work for all of us," Alexander replied gently. "The most important thing is that we're still a family, even if Mummy and I won't be living together anymore." As the world absorbed the news of their separation, Elena and Alexander faced the reality that their private heartbreak had become public property. Every future appearance would be analyzed for signs of reconciliation or evidence of moving on. Their children would grow up with their parents' failed marriage as part of their public identity. But in the quiet moments between media statements and official obligations, Elena and Alexander began the slow, painful process of reimagining their relationship as co-parents and friends rather than husband and wife. Their love story was ending as a marriage, but they were determined to write a new chapter focused on healing, growth, and the enduring bond they shared through their children. 6 months had passed since the separation announcement, and autumn had arrived at Ravencrest Palace with its usual display of golden leaves and crisp morning air. Princess Elena stood in her new private apartment in the East Wing, a smaller but beautifully appointed space that had been converted for her use. The palace staff had worked carefully to create a warm, personal environment that reflected Elena's artistic sensibilities while maintaining appropriate royal protocol. Elena had found unexpected peace in the independence of her new living arrangement. For the first time in decades, she could choose her own daily schedule, decorate her space according to her personal taste, and pursue interests that had been set aside during the busiest years of royal duty. She had started painting again, setting up an easel by the large windows that overlooked the palace gardens. Her health had also improved significantly. The reduction in stress from trying to maintain the facade of a happy marriage, combined with fewer formal obligations, had helped manage her autoimmune symptoms. Dr. Harper had noted marked improvements in Elena's energy levels and overall well-being during their monthly checkups. The children had adapted to their new family dynamic with remarkable resilience. They spent weekdays with Elena in the East Wing and weekends with Alexander in the main palace apartments. Both parents attended school events and family gatherings together, presenting a united front for their children while maintaining appropriate boundaries in their own relationship. Prince Michael, now 17 and preparing for his final year at Eton, had grown into a mature young man who served as a bridge between his parents. He often carried messages between them and helped coordinate family activities. His friends at school had been surprisingly supportive, and Michael found that his parents' honesty about their struggles had actually strengthened his own relationships. Princess Sophie had channeled her emotions into her art and music, becoming an accomplished violinist and painter. She spent long hours in Elena's new studio, learning watercolor techniques and discussing the emotional power of artistic expression. The shared creative time had deepened the bond between mother and daughter. Prince James, though still the youngest at 13, had perhaps adapted best of all. He enjoyed having two distinct homes within the palace and took pride in helping both parents with their individual projects. He had become Alexander's regular companion on environmental site visits and Elena's assistant for her charity work with children's art programs. The media attention had gradually decreased as other news cycles captured public interest. Royal correspondents still followed Elena and Alexander's separate appearances, but the initial feeding frenzy had subsided. Both had learned to navigate press events with grace while maintaining their privacy about personal matters. Elena's public role had evolved in positive directions. Without the pressure of being half of the perfect royal couple, she had found her authentic voice as an advocate for arts education and mental health awareness. Her speeches had become more personal and powerful, drawing from her own experiences with identity and self-discovery. She had given a particularly moving address to the National Mental Health Conference in September, speaking candidly about the importance of seeking help during difficult times and the strength required to make major life changes. The response had been overwhelmingly positive, with many people expressing gratitude for her vulnerability and honesty. Alexander, meanwhile, had thrown himself even deeper into his environmental work, traveling extensively to climate conferences and conservation sites. His passion for protecting the planet had always been genuine, but now it served as both a professional calling and a personal refuge from the emotional complexities of his family situation. He had also begun working with a new private therapist, Dr. Michael Stevens, who specialized in helping public figures navigate personal challenges while maintaining professional obligations. The sessions had helped Alexander understand how his dedication to duty, while admirable, had sometimes prevented him from being emotionally present for his family. The most challenging aspect of their separation continued to be the formal events where Elena and Alexander appeared together. State dinners, royal weddings, and official ceremonies required them to present a unified front while managing their own complex emotions about their shared history. At the King of Denmark's birthday celebration in October, they had worked together seamlessly, greeting international dignitaries and representing their nation with dignity and warmth. Observers noted their continued mutual respect and affection, even as they maintained careful physical and emotional boundaries. "They still look at each other with such kindness," Catherine Morrison had observed to Elena afterward. "That's something beautiful, even if it's different from what it used to be." Elena had begun exploring the possibility of expanding her role with UNESCO, potentially taking on an international ambassadorship focused on arts education in developing countries. The position would allow her to travel independently and build on her expertise while maintaining her royal status and obligations to her children. Alexander supported this opportunity enthusiastically, recognizing Elena's need for professional fulfillment and personal growth. They had developed an effective communication system for coordinating schedules and family responsibilities, often working through their private secretaries to minimize emotional complexity while ensuring practical matters were handled efficiently. The palace staff had also adapted to the new arrangements with professional grace. Many had worried initially about divided loyalties or uncomfortable working conditions, but Elena and Alexander's commitment to maintaining respectful boundaries had created a surprisingly harmonious environment. Christmas planning had presented unique challenges as the family prepared to navigate their first major holiday since the separation. After much discussion and input from the children, they decided to maintain traditional Christmas Eve and Christmas Day celebrations together, with Elena staying in guest quarters in the main palace for the holiday period. "We may not be husband and wife anymore," Alexander had explained to James Wellington, "but we're still a family. The children shouldn't lose their Christmas memories because their parents couldn't make their marriage work." Elena had agreed, though she felt nervous about the emotional intensity of recreating their family traditions in their new reality. Catherine had advised her to focus on the joy the children would feel from having both parents present for the holiday celebration. As winter approached, both Elena and Alexander were learning to find happiness in their individual paths while honoring their shared commitment to their children and their royal duties. Their love story as a married couple had ended, but they were writing a new chapter as dedicated co-parents and individuals pursuing their own dreams and callings. The palace that had once housed a fairy tale marriage now held something more complex, but perhaps more authentic. Two people who had loved each other deeply, accepted their incompatibility with grace, and committed to supporting each other's growth and their children's well-being even as they pursued separate futures. Elena had started seeing a grief counselor to help process the loss of her marriage dreams, while Alexander had begun exploring the possibility of eventually finding love again, though he knew such a decision was years in the future. Both understood that their public roles would always connect them, and they were determined to make that connection a source of strength rather than pain for themselves, and their children. 2 years had passed since that painful March morning when Prince Alexander and Princess Elena announced their separation to the world. Now, on a bright May afternoon in 2026, they found themselves facing another milestone that would forever change their family's story. Their formal divorce proceedings were complete, and they were preparing to tell their children that both parents would be moving forward with new chapters in their lives. Elena sat in her private study, which had become a warm sanctuary filled with her artwork, books, and photographs of her children. The walls displayed several of her recent paintings, watercolors that captured the beauty of the palace gardens through the changing seasons. Her art had become not just a hobby, but a form of healing, helping her process the complex emotions of rebuilding her identity outside of her marriage. The divorce settlement had been handled with discretion and mutual respect. Elena would retain her royal title and continue her charitable work while receiving a generous financial arrangement that ensured her independence. She would remain living in the East Wing of the palace until Prince James finished his education, after which she planned to establish her own residence in London while maintaining apartments at the palace for family occasions. More significantly, Elena had accepted the UNESCO position as Special Ambassador for Arts Education, a role that would take her around the world while allowing her to maintain her primary residence in Ethiopia and her commitment to her children. The position represented everything she had dreamed of: meaningful work that utilized her expertise, international travel and cultural exchange, and the opportunity to make a real difference in children's lives through arts education. Alexander knocked gently on her study door, a courtesy they had maintained throughout their separation. "Elena, are you ready for our conversation with the children?" She looked up from the letter she was writing to her mother, explaining the finalization of the divorce. "Yes, I think so." "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Alexander admitted with a rueful smile, "but also hopeful. I think this might actually bring us all some peace." The children, now older and more mature, had been expecting this news. Michael, nearly 19 and preparing for university, had grown into a thoughtful young man who understood the complexities of adult relationships. Sophie, 16 and passionate about both art and environmental activism like her parents, had found her own identity through their example of pursuing personal passions. James, now 14, had become the family mediator, inheriting his mother's empathy and his father's diplomatic skills. They gathered in the blue sitting room, where they had shared so many family conversations over the years. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting warm patterns on the familiar furniture where the children had grown up hearing bedtime stories and discussing their days at school. "You're getting divorced," Michael said simply before his parents could begin their prepared remarks. "And that's okay." Elena and Alexander exchanged a surprised look. They had planned careful words to explain the legal finalization of their separation, but their eldest son had cut straight to the heart of the matter. "We've been thinking about it," Sophie added, speaking for her brothers. "And we want you both to know that we understand why you need to do this. You've both been happier and more like yourselves since you separated." James nodded seriously. "Plus, you still like each other. You're just not married anymore. That's different from hating each other, which would be much worse." Elena felt tears welling up at her children's maturity and compassion. "We want you to know that this doesn't change anything about our family. We're still your parents, we still love each other as friends, and we'll still do important things together, like graduations and weddings and grandchildren someday," Alexander added with a gentle smile. "Are you going to date other people?" James asked with the directness of a teenager. "Someday, perhaps," Alexander answered honestly. "Not anytime soon. And any future relationships would never replace our family or change how much we love you." Elena nodded. "The most important thing is that we're all healthy and happy and supporting each other's dreams." "Speaking of dreams," Sophie said excitedly, "Mummy, tell them about your UNESCO job." Elena shared the details of her new role, explaining how she would travel to different countries to help establish arts education programs while maintaining her base in Ethiopia. The children were enthusiastic about the opportunity to occasionally join her on some trips during school holidays. Alexander had his own news to share. He had been invited to chair a new international climate coalition, a role that would expand his environmental work globally while preparing him for his future responsibilities as king. The position would require significant travel, but he had arranged his schedule to ensure consistent time with the children. "So you're both going to be traveling the world making it better," Michael observed. "That's actually pretty cool." As the conversation continued, Elena reflected on how much had changed since that tearful goodbye to their marriage 2 years earlier. The pain of accepting their incompatibility had gradually transformed into appreciation for the growth they had both experienced as individuals. Alexander had learned to balance his royal duties with personal well-being, setting boundaries that allowed him to be more present for his children and more authentic in his public role. His environmental work had gained international recognition, and he was frequently invited to speak at conferences and policy meetings around the world. Elena had rediscovered her confidence and independence, building a fulfilling career that honored both her royal status and her personal expertise. Her work with children's art programs had expanded beyond Ethiopia, and she had begun writing a book about the healing power of creative expression. Their relationship as co-parents had evolved into something stronger than it had been during the final years of their marriage. Without the pressure of romantic expectations, they could appreciate each other's qualities and support each other's goals without resentment or disappointment. "There's something else we want to discuss," Elena said as the afternoon conversation wound down. "The media will probably have questions about the divorce, and we want to handle this as a family." They agreed on a simple statement emphasizing their continued friendship, their commitment to their children, and their exciting new professional opportunities. The children would not be available for interviews, but they were prepared to handle questions from friends and classmates with dignity and honesty. That evening, Elena and Alexander shared a quiet dinner in the family dining room, their first meal alone together since the early days of their separation. The conversation was comfortable, filled with updates on their work, concerns about the children, and even some gentle humor about their shared memories. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked as they finished their meal. "The marriage, I mean. Do you wish we had never married?" Elena considered the question carefully. "No, I don't regret it. We had 15 wonderful years before things became difficult, and we created 3 amazing human beings together. I regret that we couldn't find a way to grow together instead of apart, but I don't regret loving you or sharing our lives for as long as we did." "I feel the same way," Alexander replied. "And I'm grateful that we found a way to end our marriage without destroying our friendship." As they prepared to leave the dining room and return to their separate quarters, Elena felt a sense of completion that had been missing for years. Their love story as husband and wife was officially over, but their story as a family was continuing in a new and healthier direction. The next morning, the palace released a brief statement confirming the divorce and outlining Elena's new UNESCO role and Alexander's climate work. The public response was largely supportive, with many people expressing admiration for the couple's dignified handling of their separation and their obvious commitment to their children's well-being. Royal correspondents noted that Elena and Alexander had managed to transform what could have been a scandalous royal divorce into a story of growth, mutual respect, and family loyalty. Their example offered hope to other couples facing similar challenges and demonstrated that love could take many forms, including the love of former spouses who chose to support each other's happiness even after their marriage ended. As Elena packed for her first official UNESCO trip to South America, she felt excited about the future for the first time in years. Alexander would be traveling to a climate conference in Geneva the same week, but they had coordinated their schedules to ensure one parent was always available for the children. Their fairy tale marriage had ended, but Elena and Alexander had written a new kind of love story, one about forgiveness, growth, and the enduring bonds of family that could survive even the most painful transitions. It was not the ending they had imagined on their wedding day 23 years earlier, but it was an ending that honored the best parts of their love while freeing them both to pursue their individual dreams and, perhaps someday, find new love with partners who could better complement the people they had become. The world had watched their marriage begin with hope and joy, witnessed its struggles with sympathy, and now observed its conclusion with respect and understanding. Prince Alexander and Princess Elena had shown that even fairy tales could end with dignity, and that sometimes the most loving thing two people could do was set each other free to write new chapters in their separate but connected stories.